Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the 36th meeting and last meeting in 2013 of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. Can I welcome my colleagues here, welcome our witnesses who are eager to contribute, I can see. And I can remind everyone, please, to either turn off or turn to silent their mobile phones or other electrical devices. We have apologies this morning from Dennis Robertson, who's involved with his Members' Bill proposal on disabled parking, and we're joined instead by Joan McCoplin as substitute. Welcome. Item 1 on the agenda, I would ask if the committee are content that we take item 4 in private. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is continuation of our inquiry into access to finance, and I'm very pleased we're joined this morning by Omar Sheikh, who is the Executive Board Member of Islamic Finance Council UK, and Graham Burnside, Executive Board Member, Islamic Finance Council UK, and also Partner Head of Banking and Finance at Todd Murray LLP. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Before we get into questions, would you like to say something just by way of an introduction about Islamic finance and explain the background to us?
Yes, well, we're very happy to do that. I think my colleague Omar will say a bit about Islamic finance in general to give you some of the background picture there. Perhaps I should start by just saying a little about what the Islamic Finance Council is, which is a not-for-profit body which was established, well, originally around about 2005-06 in an informal, unincorporated sort of way, and then was formally incorporated as a body in 2008. It is actually the name is the Islamic Finance Council UK, as I say, but it is actually a Scottish-based body. It has its office in Glasgow, and the idea behind it, and my colleague Omar was one of the prime movers in this, was to set up effectively a not-for-profit body with the purpose of both generally spreading the word, as it were, about Islamic finance and spreading knowledge and education in it, and promoting also the growth of the commercial side of the industry. Although, as I say, it itself is very much a not-for-profit body. Since that time, it has grown significantly as regards the range of things it does. It now, as well as continuing with our general education programme within the UK, has an international programme on the go for educating Islamic scholars in commercial and financial matters. That might seem a slightly sort of odd way around to be going, but the reason is that any Islamic finance transaction requires to be signed off, as it were, by an Islamic scholar, by an imam, and for that to happen, then they need to know sufficient about the commercial world. There's a shortage of these people worldwide, so that's the reason behind that. The council has also operated as a consultancy, effectively, to various bodies, including at one point the Scottish Government. So that's the general picture on what the hats, I suppose, that we mainly have on today. And perhaps Omar can hand over to you to say something about the hats in general.
Good morning, ministers and respected members. By way of backdrop, I'm a chartered accountant. I used to work with Ernst & Young and used to head up their Islamic finance desk in London. In addition, I'm a member of, a contributing member of the UKTI and Treasury subcommittees, which were established under the prior administration and the late Sir Eddie George to make the UK a global gateway for Islamic finance, as Gordon Brown initially positioned the UK. What was interesting about that initial strategy we put together when I was living in London with Westminster and Mansion House was there was two key pillars to that strategy, and one of them actually resonates perfectly with today's topic, which was financial inclusion, to ensure and to promote financial inclusion within the UK. The second pillar was to maintain the London and the city as a premier global hub of finance, as a financial market. So what is, and I'm sure you'll have a number of questions exactly what that involves and what's involved with that. And probably that links well with the more recent statements last month, just over a month ago, by Prime Minister David Cameron at the World Islamic Economic Forum around making sure every government department in Westminster considers Islamic financing. And that was also augmented by His Royal Highness's comments as well at that same event. What is Islamic finance? Very simply, if I may, the easiest way to understand it is through two lenses. One is ethical finance. So for those of you who are familiar with ethical finance, you'll know it's a world characterized by shades of green, about avoiding investing in sectors which are deemed harmful to society, about social good, and financial services and banking, a topic which has been particularly intriguing in the current crisis, where we've had people like, I believe, Lord Turner saying much of conventional banking is socially useless. So that's the first lens by which you understand Islamic finance as a form of ethical finance that actually has a whole host of shared values there with other religions and so on. And the second lens you need to apply to understand Islamic finance is actually very similar to a structured product in the finance and banking sector because of the restriction on interest. Islam, similar to the other Abrahamic traditions, has an aversion, if not a ban, on the receiving or charging of interest. So normally, at this point, most financiers or bankers fall off their seats and say, what? we're going to be involved in a sector which does not receive. How can you do banking without receiving and charging interest? Well, you can, and you can do it in probably a more socially responsible way. And indeed, it's been the case in the church and the Jewish tradition for many, many centuries. We had a lovely round table with the Archbishop of Canterbury in the House of Lords just, again, 2 months ago, looking at the shared values that the Abrahamic faiths have. And what was fascinating was actually the great Reverend Henry Duncan of the Church of Scotland, who founded the Savings Bank movement. That was the exact model that was used to create the very first contemporary Islamic bank. So there's a lot of parallels there. Ultimately, what does that mean? It means that you can invest in an economy, but you're more aligned and likely to invest in an equity-based form of financing as opposed to debt-based financing. You can still make returns through trading, through investment, through being aligned. You can make returns through renting and charging rent. So the bank can buy a building and lease that out to people. So you can make returns using Islamic finance, and indeed there's been very good returns. Happy to answer more of your detailed questions I'm sure you have on financial inclusion.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. Just to get things started, can you say just what is the market, domestically, I mean within Scotland and perhaps in the UK more generally, what is the market opportunity for Islamic finance?
Well, we see it, if you look at it through two perspectives. One is domestic retail and SME markets. Within the retail space, we've seen banks established like HSBC, Lloyds, Islamic Bank of Britain established and start servicing the domestic market. Predominantly that's Muslims, but you'll also find other people as well of no faith or different faiths who align themselves. If we look at Malaysia, the example there, HSBC is the largest provider of retail products and retail Islamic products, I should say, in Malaysia. 50% of the users are Chinese Malays who simply just agree with the ethical principles and the pricing and the quality of the product. So there's a big opportunity there. Graham and Todd structured the very first Islamic mortgage under Scots law, and the initial amendments we made to the Finance Act as part of the Treasury Subcommittee gave relief for stamp duty, but that was not extended to Scotland. It was initially only to England and Wales. So we see a significant opportunity there, first of all, in that retail space. And that is both to catalyse economic activity from people who actually, frankly, every so often, every Ramadan or every so often they get to a point and say, well, actually, I'm heavily engaged in debt and interest and I want to pull back. So they won't expand their businesses. They won't extend their businesses. They'll actually let staff go and cut down their activities. So there's a significant opportunity there for on that side, on the banking side, but also on the asset management side as well in terms of those people's savings and investments and their pensions. The other side of the opportunity that we've tapped into extremely successfully in the city, and this was what we said to Scottish Government at the time, was we've managed to attract billions of dollars of investment into London predominantly, some into Manchester and Birmingham as well, which has been structured in a Sharia-compliant way. So you might be familiar with the Shard. That's the tallest tower in Western Europe. That's been funded Islamically. It's on London Bridge. Chelsea Barracks, the Aston Martin. I'm not sure how many of you drive Aston Martins, but that's also...
Mr. Brody has one.
I'm keeping the guy.
That's probably a wise decision in the current weather. But that's also a...
I think we'll just stick to Islamic finance.
Should have
shall
dropped in the Aston Martin. But Chelsea Barracks, the Shard, we're looking at projects currently in the Olympic Village as well. All of these hundreds of millions of dollars per transaction bought into London through direct structuring through Islamic financing. So there's a significant opportunity there. The two areas we tailored at the conference, which Todd's Murray hosted together with the ISC, was around specifically for Scotland. One was earlier this year where we looked at the opportunity for funding infrastructure and renewable energy projects in Scotland. We had a conference looking at that in detail with the Green Investment Bank, investors from the Gulf, SFT and others. So we see a lot of opportunity there for you as the Parliament to take forward. And the second piece being we did around the fund management community here in Edinburgh specifically. So if you look at Aberdeen Asset Management, SWIP, they both have Islamic funds which they manage, but we see the opportunity for that to extend significantly as well. So that's probably three actually very distinct areas of opportunity for Scotland.
Thank you. I'll bring in Hans Alamak.
Thank you very much, Omar. Assalamu alaikum. And let me ask you a couple of questions. In 2010, the Islamic Bank of Britain suffered mounting losses, which led to it being bailed out by Qatar. If the Scottish Government assists an enterprise into Islamic funding ventures, what safeguards could you give us to make sure that that's not repeated? I mean, the Islamic Bank of Britain is the only example we have in terms of a Muslim banking scenario.
There's a fundamental difference there. There was no bailout. I was at EY. We were appointed to do a refinancing. It's very normal when you set up a business, you recapitalize it as it grows. And in banking, the way it works with balance sheets, you need to recapitalize the balance sheets. Because of the bailouts in the mainstream banking, we moved from Basel II to Basel III, which required an increased capitalization of the balance sheets. So indeed, for Islamic Bank of Britain to grow, it needed further funding. So it was not a bailout, it was actually further investment, and it successfully attracted that further investment. But there's no doubt about it, the Islamic Bank of Britain and any new venture into a new area will be challenged, it will be difficult, it will not be a slam dunk, it will not be easy, Mr. Hansler, it will be challenging, because it takes time to educate the community. I think Islamic Bank of Britain, you have to remember, was on the retail side. It wasn't doing the other large investment deals. The UK has four standalone Islamic banks. Five standalone Islamic banks, four of which are investment banks in the city and one of which is retail. Although Islamic Bank of Britain is still interesting because it created over 200 jobs in Birmingham and around, headquartered in Birmingham, but also around the country as well. So it was not a bailout, it was actually a recapitalization to further growth, and that just concluded 2 weeks ago. I was with the CEO and our ambassador to Bahrain at the World Islamic Banking Conference, CEO of IBB, and it was released in the press there that Musharraf Arian have concluded that transaction. And their growth has been stellar in the last year. They've actually doubled their mortgages over the space of last year, when other banks have been shrinking and indeed reducing, deleveraging their positions. So yes, there are inherent challenges on the retail side. Tomorrow morning, if we want to launch an ethical bank, forget faith. If we just want to launch an ethical bank, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a consumer education issue, there's going to be a cultural issue and so on. So those challenges are inherent in any new business model. But the IBB was not a bailout, it was actually a recapitalization. None of the Islamic banks, let's be very, very clear about this, in this global crisis, none of the Islamic banks globally have had any bailout whatsoever. Studies by the IMF, academic studies by the IMF and World Bank have shown Islamic banks are systemically less volatile than conventional banking. It is early days. I wouldn't go overboard with the academic evidence at this stage because it's only really 15 years of contemporary experience. But the model underpinning Islamic banking is actually very similar to the prudent model of ethical and prudent finance, which Scotland's got a fantastic heritage in. So if we go back to those principles, the way we see it, we've been doing a lot of work in the ethical finance arena, and we've been putting forward the proposition which is currently being considered by Mr. Swinney, I believe, on creating an ethical finance hub in Scotland, a centre of excellence for ethical finance. And actually, you cannot dislocate the two because of the nature of your question, because the bailouts all have the connotations of what's happened in the contemporary banking crisis. The reality is, if we go back to some of these principles, which are a lot of common sense, much of this bailout scenario would not have occurred, would not have been required.
The other thing I was interested in was the opportunity to work with the Scottish banks. Do you see a scenario where there is a possible opportunity for Scottish banks to engage with you in a very positive way, so that you could possibly work hand in glove together? Is there anything worthy of consideration in that area?
Absolutely, there is. There absolutely is opportunity for that to happen. But at the end of the day, I think, if you go back to what did we do in London, why was it successful in London? Well, it was because Eddie George got up, did something, the ex-governor, the late governor of the Bank of England. At that point, Gordon Brown, who was the Chancellor at the time, came out and was very vocal. There was a whole machine behind, which I was part of at UKTI, at the Treasury, at Mansion House, promoting, creating a level playing field, being proactive in the sector, going around the world saying, we're open for business, we're open for business. That's the environment in which Lloyds TSB, HSBC set up their Islamic banking operations actually in England and Wales. They actually never serviced the Scottish market, which we were quite angry about. Like, why are you only providing retail products and these other products in England and Wales and not up in Scotland? But that's their commercial prerogative. So there's a whole context and a backdrop which, if you want private sector activity to happen, it needs to be catalysed. And I think there's no better example of that than what happened at the recent World Islamic Economic Forum. I'm not sure if any of you read the front page of the FT about George Osborne's comments on issuing. The UK government has now said they're going to issue 200 million. The first Western government is going to issue a £200 million sterling sovereign Islamic bond. That event was a very large event. 14 heads of states from around the OIC countries. Malaysian investors have just bought Battersea Power Station, the old power station, derelict station, are converting that into a mixed-use development. His Royal Highness Prince Charles was there addressing the audience as well. So there has to be I think me and Graham have discussed this many times, there has to be the political will and the context there for this activity to occur, because it is a new sector, it is a novel sector, and the real trick is attracting the money from the Gulf, because Islamic Bank of Britain and all the other investment banks have all been funded by over £1 billion just into the balance sheets of these banks. From where? From the Gulf, from the Middle East. So if you want to deal with this market, you cannot just take a purely domestic perspective. You can, and there's no harm in that, and you will do well, particularly from a financial inclusion perspective, because, as David Cameron said, we're now going to have Sharia-compliant student loans for Muslims who want to go to university but are averse to doing so, or feel there's a barrier for them going to university because they do not have access to student loans, and we know what they've done with tuition fees down south of the border. So, yes, there is a domestic play, but I would say you're missing a huge opportunity if you don't look at it from an international perspective.
Just to sum up, just as a closing remark, I just want to say that Scotland's open for business. So
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to say it, that's great, but it has to be proven, it has to be said to them. You guys need to be out there saying it to them. Not a single minister from Scotland was at WIEF.
Well, we'll change that.
Right? And that's for me as a Scot is disappointing. You know, as a Scot, that's disappointing. You know,
Perhaps I could just mention there as one follow-up to your earlier question that because it was just in the press yesterday as it happened that the Islamic Bank of Britain did earlier this year carry through its first commercial financing operation within Scotland. And indeed, it has for some time, been sort of considering or sniffing around the possibility of moving into Scotland. But having established a residential mortgage and other retail products a few years back now, as I say, it's now set up so as to be able to produce Scots law compliant as well as Islamic compliant commercial funding. So hopefully that's the start of further growth in that direction too.
Good morning, John. Interestingly, I looked at the deal that was done with Al Mizan in terms of the commercial property. I understand at least obviously not in detail, the aim and the objective is to involve in non-profit and non-political organisations. Is the bank, does the Financial Council support access to finance from non-Islam bodies?
Well,
when you say the Imam has to sign off these deals, if a deal went forward for a non-Islamic organisation, would that be accepted?
You mean the funding being provided to non-Islamic?
Dick Brody Enterprises goes along and says to the Islamic Bank, I want...
Absolutely, it's available. Yes, in fact, one of the purposes of the council is to try and spread the word that Islamic finance is emphatically not just for Muslims. It's available to anyone who whether commercially or ethically or philosophically likes the idea and is interested in the product that's being offered. And interestingly, as Omar was saying, in some of the main Islamic centres of the world, such as Malaysia, a very conspicuous pattern of recent years has been the growth in non-Muslim participation in Islamic finance, but indeed the last time I spoke to a senior person in the Islamic Bank of Britain, which is based in Birmingham, they were saying to me that some of their savings products, they now, even within the UK, have more non-Muslims than Muslims on their books, as it were.
I think you should also ask Scottish Coal what they think of that, because they've received Islamic funding from Bank of London, Middle East.
Well, that's encouraging. I was somewhat confused by, the objectives and the aims as established by the bank in trying to wrestle with the deal, which is a shared ownership to begin with, and then I understand that the bank will then transfer the general ownership to the company as listed, which seems to me like a normal commercial transaction, and on the basis of that, I would have thought there must be some element of return that is considered when the beneficial ownership is transferred to the partner, the bank's partner.
Yes, I mean I won't go too far into the technical details of the way the way this particular deal was structured, which I was involved in. But essentially, I think the way to look at it is to pick up on what Omar was saying earlier. The fundamental principle generally is summarised as you can't charge interest. But that's really itself just a sort of one aspect of the more basic idea that you shouldn't use money as an asset in itself. There shouldn't be trading in money. Or money should be used to promote commerce, to promote well-being, whatever it is, but not just as an end in itself.
That's one side, but at the end of the day, whether we talk about a return, it could be saying no return on money, but return on other assets.
What
I struggle with
No,
Which
Which part do you struggle with? You can have a return in Islamic finance. Profit is allowed. Free markets are allowed.
Absolutely.
What's the part you struggle with? Sorry, Minister.
In terms of the return, why would the emphasis on no return on money?
I think the way to look at it is that all Islamic finance transactions are effectively seen as joint ventures. It's a joint venture between the funder and the borrower, and that they are in this together and they each get a share of what comes out of it, is the fundamental approach.
And presumably,
so absolutely the bank does get a return.
Okay. Just for clarity, because it's, I think it's good to know that access to finance will be available to across the community, and clearly it has to be because of European competition law. But in terms of the bank itself dealing with other banks, we've heard about relationships, how does it approach in the city the setting of LIBOR rates, for example, and interbank borrowing?
Yeah, sorry, what's the question about? What, LIBOR?
Again, it comes back to no money on money, and I mean, that's a question probably with the remit of the committee, but it's just to help me understand the ethos. In terms of setting LIBOR rates, does the bank in any way participate in that with the General Banking Council?
Sure. Two comments. First of all, your first comment about access to finance should be open to everyone in society. Well, that's exactly the problem why the UK government was promoting Islamic finance, is conventional finance excludes nearly 2-3% of the UK community just through the faith basis, right? So conventional finance, interest-based finance, was already excluding and causing problems of access to the Muslim community. They were having to engage with it out of necessity, and even to that extent they weren't comfortable in doing so. So that was the whole basis. Actually the other way around. Islamic finance is open to everyone. It doesn't exclude anyone from that. The question of LIBOR, Islamic banks are not involved whatsoever in setting, or indeed, like conventional banks, fixing LIBOR. You know, LIBOR. Allegedly. I know the chairman of Barclays. He didn't use the word allegedly. He just apologised. It was in private, the conversation. So we're not involved at all whatsoever. Interest, but the principle is, as Graham was saying, in itself, interest, making money on money without any activity of the capital, is problematic amongst Islamic theologians. Indeed, you go back to Aristotle, and he will say the same thing. If you put something which is non-organic and you leave it there, it does not replicate into 1 point. If it's 10% rate, it does not replicate into 1.1. So that issue is there, and indeed you say it with the Abrahamic faith. So in terms of interest, the Islamic finance market is not involved in it whatsoever. It does not live in a bubble, though, right? It's a good question, Minister, in terms of the implication of interest. Islamic finance doesn't live in a bubble, and that's why right at the beginning I said it's a structured product. Yes, it's an ethical product, but it's a structured product. So Islamic mortgages, when they charge rent to the co-owner for the portion of the house they do not own, when they're charging rent, they cannot simply just make up a rent rate. They have to look at market numbers. They have to look at general market returns. And then they get involved in benchmarking and so on. So there is an influence of that. Islamic finance doesn't... No, they consider commercial factors, and interest rates dictate all commercial factors. They absolutely dictate commercial factors, but there's not in itself a determining factor of within the legal structure. If you look at the asset management community, Islamic funds have been in the top quartile performers. Why that is because we apply financial ratios whereby you cannot invest in companies which are geared to a certain extent. So the scholars have turned around and said, well, actually, hold on a minute. We don't live in a utopia world where there's no interest anywhere around the world. The global financial markets have interest. Companies have interest. So if I wanted to invest in a company which makes these microphones and speakers, they might have interest borrowing or interest income on their balance sheet. So it doesn't mean you don't touch that. It's not a brewery. It's not a bank. It's not an armaments company. It's not one of these excluded sectors. So there's a very pragmatic approach the scholars have taken, exactly to your point. They've been very pragmatic and practical about it.
One last question.
One last question.
Thank you, Commissioner. On that basis, why isn't there a raft of people, maybe there is, of small businesses in Scotland at the door of the Islamic Bank?
No Islamic banks in Scotland. Simple answer. All the banks have been set up and they're in London. Okay. And there is a number of people, from SMEs to individuals to multinationals, right through to parliamentarians and prime ministers at the doors of these banks and funds.
I mean, I think it's
we haven't done enough to attract them to Scotland.
Well, to pick up the point I mentioned earlier, and I knew that the Islamic Bank of Britain specifically has been for a while, and I suspect might have been here if it hadn't been for the recession. Has certainly been looking at Scotland. Yeah, but the short answer at the moment is that purely within Scotland there are no doors for them to knock on. They can. Yeah, if they're made aware of it, then they can apply to the IBB in Birmingham or whatever. But at the moment, other than mortgages, the options are limited within Scotland.
I think most of my questions have been answered. I mean, certainly I was very interested to hear in the concept of a bank that's operating not for profit, which I'm still trying to get my head around.
There's a confusion. The IFC, the Islamic Finance Council, which we sit on the body of, which we sit on the board of, is a not-for-profit. The banks are for-profit commercial organisations with shareholders. So I apologise if that's maybe a confusion, which is.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that then, and particularly around they don't charge interest as well. But you've further explained to Mr. Brodie on. Actually, there is a profit there for investors, and obviously, if there's people go for a loan, they are assessed as a normal transaction. So, and you've explained why there's no more businesses involved in Scotland, because you don't have a bank in Scotland, but people in Scotland could still access that facility in Birmingham, as you said. So what is it you want to do then to make your business available to people in Scotland?
Our business at the council is just promotion and advocacy, so we're there to help promote the sector. We've been promoting to Scottish Government and to Scottish businesses the opportunity that Islamic finance presents, as successfully proven and tapped into by the City of London. So we'll continue to do that work. I mean, we continue to urge Scottish Government to engage in the sector in a way which, indeed, the UK Government has. Not just UK Government, Christine Lagarde has come out on record looking at Islamic financing. The German state of Saxony, Axenholt, have already issued a sovereign Islamic bond and tapped into the FDI. The Vatican have come out in support of it. So, and indeed so has Singapore and many other countries. So we will continue to do our work, Margaret, which is just to promote the sector so the country can benefit, Scotland can benefit, and also the commercial players can get engaged.
Bank in Scotland, is there?
Well, we're a not-for-profit body to promote the sector. We're not shareholders of a bank or so on, but we would encourage those people who want to do that to exactly do that, and we'll help them and support them and connect them with yourself and other parties where necessary. And indeed, we've been doing exactly that.
I would say the sort of fundamental message, I suppose, that we're here with, and what, as I understand it, you're essentially talking about is sources of finance and where they can be found in the present restricted world. And I suppose our message is that the Islamic world, in particular, as Omar says, the Gulf area, is a huge reservoir potentially of sources of funding, and that there is no reason at all why Scotland couldn't make its efforts to spread the word that it is welcoming to that, and that it is interested in bringing in that and encouraging that source of finance. And as Mr. Brody I think put his finger on a very important point, and part of that is getting the message across, and part of what we're doing is getting the message across that when people hear the word Islamic, and not to mention even more perhaps negative aspects if they hear the word Sharia, they immediately switch off and think, I'm not a Muslim, that's nothing to do with me. We're very keen to get the message across that whether at government level or at individual retail level, investment level, then that it is a significant potential source of funding in the world as it currently stands.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think possibly a lot of my questions have been answered too. I'm really pleased that you're with us this morning. I think it's fair to say that we're all learning quite a lot about a sector we don't know enough about. I mean, it seems to me that Islamic banking has much to commend it, and that if it was available on our high streets, I would imagine it'd be very popular. So I would maybe like to investigate a bit further what we can do to change that. You know, what would Scotland... It would seem that a lot of benefits for Scotland as a country if we were to establish ourselves as a leader in the provision of Islamic finance. So I'd just like to explore that a bit further, and also to find out, is Scotland unusual in its lack of Islamic banking?
Very good questions, Alison, and they're the core questions. You know, we hear from ministers around the world, because at the Council we're appointed to advise other governments, and we have done for 3 other European and an African government. We've looked at this at the Council for a number of years, and we've created, actually, I would say, we actually put together a strategy paper for Scottish Government back in 2008 with 14 recommendations on what to do. Unfortunately, not a single one of them was taken forward. So I thought maybe it was just our stupidity, you know, but then I realised, having been hired by EY and having a CA and most firms around the world taking on our advice, maybe it just wasn't us, you know. But I think I think there are a number of things that can be done, but they have to be done in a structured, systematic way. No country in the world has managed to tap into Islamic finance without the political will. Even Malaysia or the GCC or whichever country you've looked at, there's been sustained a structured political will to do so over a period of a decade. And that's why we're at an industry which has grown from, you have to remember, this is the fastest growing segment within the financial services arena, and even more so within the ethical finance subsector of that. From what was $50 billion just over a decade ago is now $1.6 trillion globally, and growing at double-digit pace. So the opportunity is significant. It will require the political will, and it requires a sustained approach. If I may, there's 3 specific things that we've, or a couple of specific things we've put forward recently to Mr. Sweeney off the back of the conversations over 24 months plus with the industry. One is the establishment of an ethical finance hub, which I mentioned earlier. We believe a catalyst vehicle as such will help us focus and drive and link Scotland into the broader markets. And we see that being important for 2 reasons. One is widening the concept from Islamic finance to a broader ethical finance. And particularly because of Scotland's heritage, with the mutual life companies here, with the Weavers Cooperative Association in the west of Scotland, with Adam Smith, with the great Reverend Henry Duncan, we see that being particularly pertinent as an approach to enter into the market, because what you can't do is just go in and be a me too, because Canada, Germany, all these other countries are trying to tap into the sector. So how do you differentiate yourself? We can't play to first mover advantage, which is what London managed to do back 8 years ago. So you need a differentiated approach. So we see that as a very meaningful, interesting way to do that. And using that vehicle also, we believe, to try and actually get the first 1 or 2 deals funded for maybe some infrastructure, maybe renewable energy project, maybe a select school, and so on and so forth. We believe those type of projects, if you just get 1 or 2 of them done, help to create that environment, help to get the noise out there, help to get the buzz out there, where people will start seeing, right, what's the opportunity here? And that will attract, we believe, more players to come to Scotland. The hub, the concept of the hub was actually to be a cluster, where it's a bit like the innovation centres and that we have, where it's a kind of shared service office space, which is at competitive rates to encourage companies to come here and set up. So that's what we were hoping the hub can do along with its other activities. So that will, again, attract investment management firms from around the world, also hopefully some of these banks down in England to come up and to set up a rep office here or a desk here initially and then take it forward from there. So that's some very specific conversations we've been having, which we think could be a good starting point. But from an international perspective, we need to have the ministers out there in a coordinated, structured way, going out to these particular markets. And as part of your existing agenda of engagement there, add this on to the agenda. I mean, I've travelled with Mansion House at least on 3 occasions. I was in Bahrain supporting an ambassador just 3 weeks ago, just a fortnight ago, sorry. And Mansion House, Lord Mayor, goes out every year. Every year he goes out on his tours. And if this isn't pomp and ceremony, I don't know what is, right? It literally is. But guess what? It actually works. It comes top of mind. And they put this at their agenda, saying, hey, we're here, we like you, we love you, blah, blah, blah. Don't forget us. London's great for this. London's great for this. London's great for X, Y, and Z. And it actually works. And they've been doing it in a systematic, structured way for year after year after year. So I think small things like that, which probably I was initially cynical about, I think do actually have a bit of long-term impact there. So there is a more broader approach, I think, that's needed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marco?
No, fine.
Joan? McCall?
Yes, just quickly, obviously the committee's having an inquiry into access to finance. In terms of the small businesses that have found it difficult to access finance through conventional banks, would they have more luck with Islamic banks?
Today, in today's world, it's just an extra banking provider on the high street. And it would help to a limited degree because the size of the market's very small. It can't have a meaningful impact. But then again, we've got examples of Scottish Coal and so on there. But I think as the market grows over time and as more providers come in, the answer to that is probably yes. But I also do believe, and we were talking about this yesterday, myself and Graham, is, if I may, at this forum say, taking off an Islamic finance hat, I think fundamentally there are other innovative ways to structure the financial services market. And I think as a committee, you need to consider that as well. I'm a conventional practitioner from the conventional finance world. Islamic finance just opened my eyes to a different way of doing things, walked into it a bit naturally because of my religious background. But actually, if the way we've been looking at it is actually looking at the work of the Chicago academics, the narrow bankers, looking at what's going on in the current crisis and looking at different ways of doing things, which in itself is actually a very healthy process. Now, pre-2007, Joe, nobody cared. Nobody cared about what the monetary reformist was saying and all this, that, the other. But since the crisis, all of a sudden, people are actually very interested. We have simply bailed out the banks. We have recapitalized their balance sheets. We've not fundamentally done anything other than that. We haven't split up the banking system from the investment banking to retail banking, bringing back Glass-Steagall or any such thing. We haven't created local community banks which service the local community. And there's no doubt about it, government has a role in initiating this. There's no doubt about it. The whole issue from the Vickers report comes to systemic risk. And you can argue whether Islamic banking changes systemic risk or not, and the arguments from the IMF is that it reduces systemic risk. And that would be my view as well, looking at the current evidence, but I think it's shallow. But nonetheless, I think you can look at it from a bigger picture and say, why, and this was a comment I made, I think, in our last round table across in the corridor when Ken McIntosh and a number of other ministers hosted us there, is that why can we not have banks in Scotland which give the people of Scotland the choice of where the money is to be lent? So I'm from Glasgow. I've just negotiated the M8 to get across here, which probably explains the state of me this morning, right? But why can we not have the choice that I want my bank to fund people in Glasgow or in infrastructure in Scotland or educational plays in Scotland or whatever? So I think that change or that innovative thinking, again, going back to some of the work of the Chicago academics and narrow banking and so on, is where I think you can actually have a more meaningful impact, which can actually genuinely give people choice. And because of technology, for the first time, we have that opportunity. We were talking yesterday specifically about why is it that SMEs can't access the capital markets. We've got a, burgeoning, booming sukuk market, which is Islamic debt capital markets, yeah? The question is, why can't SMEs access that? Why do they have to go to banks only and exclusively? So we're talking about creating an exchange, possibly something innovative, possibly something Scotland could lead in, creating a specific exchange for SMEs to access the debt capital markets at a cost-effective way. So, sorry for going on with it. But I think if your question is very valid, and I can only answer it from my broader perspective. I think Islamic today is very small. For the SME, it will have an impact, but it's not going to change it. It's not going to be a transformational impact. Maybe over a decade, yes, but I think there's more innovative ways to look at it as well today, not just Islamic.
Sorry, could I perhaps just add one further point there that what Omar's been talking about, that we've been part of what we've been doing. The IFC is organising these what were called ethical finance roundtable meetings, trying to bring together the different strands of the ethical finance world, of which Islamic finance, again from a non-Muslim perspective, probably is best seen from that kind of category. And it is absolutely, as he says, the case that these individual things, whether it's Islamic finance or whether it's a green bank like Triodos or whatever, they tend still to be relatively small operations. So part of what the idea of this hub concept would be to try and produce some, generate some synergy between them, and make the sum of the whole greater than the sum of the parts.
Can I say, reference the last question, in previous sessions I've asked questions about alternative investment markets and the Scottish Stock Exchange of a sort, and it was heartening to hear your comment. Can I just looking forward, and Omar mentioned specifically Scotland. I'm currently dealing with an intermediary who acts on behalf of a very large Middle East fund who's interested in investing in two small Scottish manufacturing enterprises. And one of the reasons I suspect that SMEs are not getting funding is because the banks in London, and having worked in the city, are more interested in investing in property. Taking things forward, this Middle Eastern fund has designated 8 countries, apparently, one of which that it wishes to invest in, one of which is Scotland. What are you doing to promote, or what are your future plans to promote funding and investment, not necessarily in property, but in things like manufacturing in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, we're active in 4 areas as a council. We've put in significant time and effort to promote Scotland as a hub, as a potential destination for investment. We will continue to do that. I had conversations with a multi-billion-dollar fund just 2 weeks ago. We were in conversations yesterday through some of the SG representatives sending deals to an investment firm who I work with in Dubai, and so on. So we'll continue to do that. However, our specific focus over the next 12 months we don't have anything allocated direct to the SMEs. We believe a structured, systematic approach to this is required, which includes which can be catalysed by an ethical finance hub or some other relevant body to do this in a way which is sustained over a period of time. But specifically over the next 12 months, we don't have anything beyond that. Which will do that, because we have our other priorities as well, which we're focusing on. That is ultimately your job. We're here to support you. If you ever need anything, happy to come across and talk to you.
And working in that partnership to know, you know, as you develop your plans, what your intentions are with further investment in Scotland.
Well, we believe the Ethical Finance Hub will be the core key vehicle towards achieving that, but that's only going to be realised if the government or council or whoever wishes to back that. We've already bought letters of interest for investment into Scotland in the excess of $200 million in the past. To present that to Minister Jim Mather, who was here previously, and you can ask him about the results on that.
Yeah, I should perhaps make the point that we are quite a small organisation, and we have to make the best use of our resources as we see fit. And as I said right at the beginning, that includes an international educational aspect. So I have to say that there are limits in what the Council as such can undertake. But we certainly see an important part of our role in this part of the world, and given that we are a Scottish base, is promoting this message of what the potential might be.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Thanks very much for coming this morning. We learn a lot, as my colleagues have said. Something I would like to press you on. You said that just now in Scotland you haven't got any banking yet, Islamic banking, but you have in London. Can you maybe give us a picture how SMEs in London can access finance in London through the Islamic banking system?
Largely speaking, I mean, the investment banks, the 4 investment banks in London target the SMEs. Islamic Bank of Britain is more, I'd say, small SME or micro SME and more retail consumer products. So you have players like Ocado. I'm not sure if you've heard of Ocado. It's the Waitrose. You've heard of Waitrose? It's their initial delivery company for their online groceries. Scottish Co and a number of other firms have been funded through and have got access to financing junior term loans and so on, and working capital facilities through players like Bank of London and Middle East. So what you'll find, so you've got these existing banks who are funding and getting involved with some of these SMEs. They are small though, relatively. I mean, the Islamic banking market, if you combine the balance sheet of these banks, is less than 2 billion or close to 2 billion, so it's nothing compared to the mainstream banks. And obviously, any provider in a market, for example, a lot of the money has actually been allocated to real estate deals. Although that hasn't necessarily always come in through the banks; it's coming through direct investment funds. So exactly as you mentioned earlier, so you'll see a lot into that. But it is a small fraction, though relatively. It's not something that's going to transform the market. And in market conditions such as dropping house prices, as we've seen over the last 3-4 years, any provider, be it Islamic or conventional, is going to be very wary on how and what they finance.
The London example is not a good example yet, is what you're saying.
I think the really large-scale investments which have occurred, which is the Shard and so on that Umar was mentioning, these are not come through the Islamic investment banks which are established in London. These are effectively direct sovereign investments or quasi-sovereign from direct from the Gulf. The activities of the investment banks within London, which is, as Umar rightly says, a relatively small scale, have actually been spread across the UK. And indeed, although rather ironically, perhaps, of the ones that I knew of, the activities they've undertaken within Scotland have actually been conventionally financed and not Islamically financed. But their activities are not confined to London, although they are based there, and therefore naturally, I suppose, they do tend to have between that and property values, they do tend to have a London bias. But it's not a sort of a London confined thing in that sense.
It's not a magic pill, though. It doesn't. Islamic banking is very small relatively, so it's not going to change the landscape overnight for SMEs.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Maybe ask lastly. I believe Scottish Development International have just established an office in the United Arab Emirates. I don't know if you're aware of that. Have you had any contact with them or any assistance from them?
Yes, we have. They've actually had a representative there for over 24 months, and we have engaged with them. The gentleman, we were with a meeting with the Minister Hamza Yusuf earlier, 3-4 months ago actually, and the representative there was with us as well. So yeah, they've been picking our brains, and we've been happy to share whatever knowledge we have with all of yourself and whatever experiences we have. So.
Yeah, there were representatives from them at the conference we held earlier this year on investment in infrastructure, which Omar mentioned.
Thank you, Ross. That's been very helpful, and I think the point you make about the need for a diverse banking system is one that we're very much aware of as a committee. So I think it was very interesting. I think we all learned a lot from that. I'm grateful to you for your time for coming along. I will now have a very short suspension to allow a changeover. Thank you. Right, if we can reconvene, thank you. I'd like to welcome our second panel. We have Richard Buxbaum, who is Europa Senior Executive, and Leslie Cannon, EU Funding Manager for Scotland Europa, in relation to our inquiry on access to finance. Before we get into questions, do you want to say a little bit about Scotland Europa and how that interacts in connection with European funding?
Yes, certainly.
Leslie Cannon, yeah.
Thank you very much, Convener. And thank you for inviting us here today to talk to you a bit about our work in European funding. Scotland Europa has been around for 21 years, promoting European engagement for Scotland and access to European funding for Scottish organisations and companies. We have an office out in Brussels and an office over here in Scotland, and we work to try and understand and influence policy and funding calls to best meet the needs of Scotland's priorities and opportunities, and we work over here to try and promote the opportunities that there are for European funding and help organisations and companies access those funds. We're part of Scottish Enterprise. We work very closely with Scottish Enterprise colleagues, SDI and the Enterprise Europe Network, which is also part of Scottish Enterprise. And we're also a membership organisation, so most of the universities, the local authority European consortia, organisations like the Scottish Funding Council, Scottish Natural Heritage, SEPA, and other representative bodies like COSLA, STUC, National Union of Students are our members, and we work also with them to help them understand and engage in European funding opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Just to open the questioning, I mean, can you tell us in general terms how successful Scottish SMEs have been at accessing funding from Europe over the period, say, 2007 to 2013? Our focus in this inquiry very much is on SMEs.
It's in certain types of funds we can tell you how successful they are. In other types of funds the information is simply not available to us at the Scottish level. For the European Structural and Investment Funds, so European Regional Development Fund, the funds that are managed at the Scottish level by the Scottish Government, a significant proportion of that money actually goes into support mechanisms for Scottish SMEs, either by way of grant or by way of financial investment through the Scottish Investment Bank. And for us, certainly from Scottish Enterprises' perspective, over 3,000 companies have benefited over the period from European-funded support mechanisms. The Scottish Investment Bank, I think, have already provided figures on the amount of companies that have engaged through them. For the Horizon 2020 funds that are managed at the Commission level and are competitive across Europe, we've looked at the figures for those, and Richard will be able to tell you the answer.
Okay. Yeah, just for referring to Horizon 2020 there, the information we've got is for the 7th Framework Programme, since the Horizon 2020 doesn't officially launch until the 1st of January 2014. The figures we actually have regarding the participation of SMEs specifically is that there's been 113 different companies who've successfully been involved in applications which have been funded. This might not sound a greatly high number, but it's a very, very competitive fund to build into, and there is a European target of having 15% of monies going to SMEs, and based on that, from the overall total of successful applications, we are above the 15% target.
I think just to add as well, there are some companies who have also accessed funds through the European Territorial Cooperation Programme, or the Interreg programmes as they're better known. Far less numbers. Private sector engagement in those funds is much more limited, but around 21 private organisations or representative organisations, again, have accessed funds through those, that then some of which is translated to grant support to SMEs.
Are there any sources of European funding that Scottish companies are excluded from?
In terms of direct access to European funds, they're not excluded from them, no, in any way that would be different from other European countries. There's no specific exclusion for Scotland to access.
So the fact that Scotland is not a separate member state of the EU doesn't mean that we lose out on funding from any EU funds?
No, we're part of the UK member state, so we have access to funds as part of that member state.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Mr. Brodie.
Good morning. That last comment isn't exactly true, is it? As the European reporter, I've had meetings, 2 meetings in the last 6 months with the European Commission. And because Scotland is not a member state, we were unaware of, for example, details of what is now the COSME programme. I'll come back to that if I may in a minute. I have a list here of 86 interfaces that are required to access funds on behalf of Scotland. It's not just on behalf of Scotland. In the UK, only 4 of them are Scottish interfaces. one of which is Scottish Enterprise. And when I had a meeting with them, they indicated they prefer to use the mechanisms like EFG rather than access European funding. Why is that?
I can't answer why the Scottish Investment Bank or Scottish Enterprise would prefer to use particular types of financial instrument. At the moment, we use the European structural funds very effectively in terms of investment, co-investment funds, loan funds and venture capital funds. And that market has been, I think Scottish Enterprise believe, very well served by those products. But I think we...
Sorry to interrupt, but can you tell me on that basis what the total COSME programme is in terms of billions of euros for the period 2014 through 2020?
I can indeed.
Let me help you. It's 2.3 billion euros.
1.4 billion is
1.4. 900 million has been taken out.
Yes, in terms of financial instruments, it's 1.4 billion.
How much of that 1.4 billion, 700 million which is for equity finance and 700 million which is for a loan fund, how much of that do you think Scotland will access with only an interface of four public bodies and one VC?
I'm afraid I couldn't estimate that at all. I think what I would say is that our role is trying to promote what European funding opportunities are available to Scotland, to the agencies who can make use of those. And I know that Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Investment Bank are looking at that wider range of financial instruments that are on the table, which include financial instruments now under Horizon, the Connecting Europe Facility, Erasmus+, the Employment and Social Innovation Fund, Life Plus, and the structural funds, to look at what are the best opportunities for meeting what they believe to be the need in Scotland. But equally, your promotion of the fact that these funds are there is very welcome. And we are working with Scottish Financial Enterprise and the Scottish Investment Bank to deliver a seminar in February for specifically targeted at potential financial intermediaries to help raise awareness of the fact that these funds are there, and we need to get better at engaging financial intermediary bodies.
I think that's, and don't get me wrong, I think Scotland Europa do an excellent job in as much as they can in terms of the interface. The harsh reality in answering the convener's last question is we have no access, meaningful access to what's actually happening in terms of European funding and indeed other operational requirements. For example, who's the small business envoy from Scotland to Europe? Yeah, because we didn't know about it because Westminster didn't tell us that that was required. How many meetings have been held by the European funding regime with small businesses in Scotland?
I can't answer that question.
Well, because, and I'm not surprised, Leslie, because, again, because we're not yet a member state, the meetings that have been held by the small funding part of the Commission, the small business part of they've been going around Europe, having meetings with small businesses, asking them, prior to legislation or directives, how it would impact them. Again, we didn't notice. So can you give me some ideas as to how we might improve that situation in terms of getting a small business envoy, having our encouraging Europe to bring their small business regime to have these meetings in Scotland, and how we can access the 1.4 billion, and particularly 700 million for loan funding for small businesses.
To be fair, I think these are questions for ministers, not questions for Scotland Europa. But Scotland Europa want to try and answer them.
Presumably they give advice to ministers.
Well, maybe they could explain their role in relation to government ministers.
Yes, certainly I can. Scotland Europa, we work very closely with Scottish Government officials, both in the Structural Funds Division, in the Europe Division. We share Scotland House as a location out in Brussels, and we work with the policy teams across the Scottish Government to help, again, identify European funding opportunities and help them consider how they can support the institutions or the businesses that can access those funds to get at them. As I say, we have recognised that use of financial instruments is something that we need to promote more widely, and we need to get more potential intermediaries engaged in looking at taking up those options. Equally, part of what we do is try to get companies to engage at the European level in terms of discussions and participation in network events that the Commission are attending, where they are discussing these matters in relation to what future policy should be, what future funding instruments should be. We are working hard with our partners and agencies that we're a part of to try and get companies actually involved on management committees, working groups, and those committees that set the terms for European funding calls as well. So we are trying to make sure that there is greater engagement at the European level. We're also working very closely through the sector teams within Scottish Enterprise with the industry leadership groups to get the industry leadership groups to think proactively about their European engagement strategy for their industry and how Scottish businesses should be or can positively engage at the European level. And equally, we also work with the Chambers of Commerce and other organisations to help them explain to their members what the opportunities are.
Question for me. I understand that, and I know from having met the management team and people in Scotland and Europa how hard you're working. The issue is the message is not getting through in terms of, and I don't lay that at the door of Scotland and Europa. The issue is that there a huge area, there is a huge area of development within Europe that we're not tapping into. And in fact, I understand that the likes of FSB, when I had conversations with them, were not aware of the interfaces that are required. So somehow we need to stimulate within them exactly what can be done, either through your offices or directly. But it just isn't working with, as I say, 4 or 5 interfaces with Europe. And part of the problem, and this is not a political point, it's a communication point, is that we're not getting information from the UK government in terms of small businesses. I mean, what's the relationship that you have in terms of getting information, reference implications for small businesses, albeit in Scotland, but with the UK government?
In terms of our relationship with the UK government, again, it tends to be through our involvement with the National Contact Point Network for European funds. So our engagement is with BIS and DCLG in terms of the how the UK is interfacing with some of the European funding opportunities, and as part of that National Contact Point Network, ourselves and colleagues in Scottish Government are involved in discussions around what is available from Europe, how that comes through the UK, and how those opportunities are promoted through that network of national contact points at the Scottish level. And we do believe there's more that can be done there, and we are in active discussion with the Scottish Government and the UK Government about how we get greater regional contact point coverage for Scotland in the next programme.
Just a small point on that. Do you feel it's the case that the UK government, when it comes to small business finance, it tends to have a bias towards the UK banking system as opposed to its engagement with Europe and the European funding mechanisms?
I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up to this? Just take the example of the COSME programme. The COSME programme is a competitive bid-in programme. Is that right?
The COSME programme has more than one element to it, but in terms of the financial instruments are managed by or likely to be managed by the European Investment Fund. Scottish Enterprise are a member of the European Investment Fund, but intermediaries have to bid into the Commission COSME programme to become registered and get access to an element of funds to invest in their particular organisation. Those bids are on a competitive basis. They are generally expected to be awarded on a first-come, first-served basis, so it is important that we raise awareness of the necessity to bid into that process as soon as possible. But they are also, again, awarded in terms of the Commission's view of the competence and the fit with the policy objectives of the programme of the intermediary as well.
Okay. So Mr. Brody's point is that Scottish SMEs are not aware of these programmes. That's a responsibility of Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Investment Bank to make sure that they're spreading awareness.
Yes, it's certainly, it's, and not just Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Investment Bank, but the Economic Development Network in Scotland. So we work with a number of agencies who engage directly with companies and trying to help promote that awareness. Also the universities, the new voucher that Scottish Funding Council have just provided is specifically to help SMEs engage with universities, to use the universities' expertise to help the SMEs access European funding. So it really is none of us can do it alone. It is part of that wider network of engagement, and it should be, I believe, part of our economic development structure, because it's very important to understand what the SMEs need the money for and make sure we are pointing them at the most appropriate European funded vehicle to get that, rather than simply promoting European funding opportunities.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Thank you for joining us. Are you aware that the Scottish Government have recently employed an individual specifically to try to identify small and medium-sized companies and organisations to tap into the European funding?
Yes, we're working really closely with the government, and as part of our regular engagement with them, we are all looking at how we can better promote and work together, and also how we can better look at what our performance has been and build on that.
That's helpful. I was actually quite amazed that last year we could have applied for up to another €1 million. And we failed to do that, and I'm just hoping that we will try to ensure that we don't allow that type of slippage to happen. Is this new recruitment helping you at all so far, or do you feel you've not really engaged with them yet? Or
I think it's too early to say, right. But I do think that in terms of the way we are going about working together and promoting European funding opportunities for 2014 to 2020, there is far greater knowledge, partnership working and awareness across the agencies, and that we're working together to deliver events and raise awareness of the range of support that's available and how the agencies can provide that support to companies.
Just to finish off, Chair. So what steps, if any, have you taken to engage and make use of this new facility that's going to be made available? Have you actually sat down and made a timetable, a framework to try and engage so that you do maximise?
Yes, we have, as part of the Research and Innovation Steering Group, which is the government, ourselves, the Enterprise Europe Network, the Scottish Funding Council and the enterprise agencies, we have an action plan of how we will work together to deliver awareness raising of funding opportunities, how we will streamline our approach to providing support to companies who want to engage in Horizon. And as I say, the Scottish Funding Council's innovation voucher was specifically designed to address a gap in terms of helping to get demand-driven research projects into Horizon by using the expertise of the universities, but by actually funding the businesses to engage with the universities.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Can I maybe ask one more question? Do you look at other parts of the EU, other subnational regions or nations, to see how they interface with EU funding, see whether they do it better than us?
Certainly. We are part of, through our Brussels office, we're part of a number of European networks. So we're part of EURADA, which is the European Regional Development Agency Network, the ERIN Network, which is the Research and Innovation Network, and a number of other networks. And we're always looking at opportunities to see how we could do things better and share with them the mechanisms they use. Sometimes it's not possible to replicate things that work in other regions or member states because their institutional setup is very different to ours. But there are certainly areas where we can learn from, and we hope to. Equally, there are areas where other regions and member states consider that we are doing good work, particularly, again, in the way we've tackled looking at the Horizon 2020 opportunities, and they are coming to us and wanting to learn from what we intend to do.
Can I just come back? We have a difference, and again, I appreciate the difficulty that Scotland Europa has. But Horizon 2020 basically is there, the 77 billion euros is there to marshal new ideas and R&D and build on innovation. What we are also considering is much more the COSME, the 1.4 billion that's planned in terms of access to ongoing development capital for businesses that are in place. I mean, is there a danger, and I say this is almost a rhetorical question, is there a danger that we're mixing the two, Horizon 2020 and the COSME programme, and that might have happened because of 900 million that was transferred from COSME to Horizon 2020. Is it quite clear, do you think, in the minds of SMEs and universities and government that there are quite separate small SME activities in terms of the Horizon 2020 and the COSME programme? Is that clear?
I don't think it will be completely clear, and I think, as I said, it's more important that in terms of the SMEs, that they are aware that there are a range of European funded opportunities and that we work with those SMEs to understand what it is they need the money for and then direct them at the most appropriate funding mechanism.
Thank you.
Margaret, yes.
A question for clarification. Just from what I've heard this morning, it would seem that if you're a business already on the radar of Scottish Enterprise or a account managed company, it seems that you can benefit from all this information and knowledge. What if you're a small business who hasn't been involved or engaged before? What do you do to go out and engage with the business community so that they have the opportunity to partake of these funds?
And that's really the strength of us being a membership organisation. So whilst we are supporting Scottish Enterprise in identifying how it can use European funds most effectively, we're also engaged with our other members, particularly organisations like the European Consortia for the Local Authorities, which brings in the community planning partnerships and the business gateway. So we are promoting the opportunities to them, and they are promoting those opportunities throughout their network of activities. Again, with the Chamber of Commerce, we support them with some of their European-funded projects. Visit Scotland also are a member of ours, and again, they've used the European structural funds in particular to provide products that provide support to tourism businesses. We're also engaged through the industry leadership groups, so in the food and drink sector with Scotland Food and Drink, and through Scotland Food and Drink, again, have provided information that has helped them to access European funds that they can then use to support their members. So it's us using our contacts within networks and those networks using their contacts to try and spread the word as widely as we can. But we would be the first to say that we can always do more, and we would always welcome ideas and opportunities of how we can spread that message further.
Thank you. Just on that point, can I ask you, are the likes of the Federation of Small Business or the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, Are they members of Scotland Europa?
No, they're not. They tend to be members of their wider networks that engage at the European level directly, but just because they're members doesn't mean we don't have any interaction with them at all.
Do you engage with them?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, on these issues of funding?
Yes. And certainly in terms of the development of the Future Structural Funds programme, they have been part of the wider partnership discussions that we've been having on how should the structural funds be used most effectively to deliver business support.
There are no more questions. Thank you very much for coming along. It's been very helpful, and we'll have a very short suspension to allow another changeover. Thank you. Right, if we can reconvene our third panel in relation to our inquiry into access finance, I'd like to welcome Jamie Adam, who is the Development Manager for Community Energy Scotland. Welcome. Before we get into questions, do you want to say a little bit about the background as you're finding things in connection with access to finance for community renewable projects?
Thank you, Karina. Yes, that'd be useful. I think it's worthwhile just giving a brief kind of history of how community renewable projects in Scotland have been funded in the past and how that's changed over the past few years. Really, since around 2002, when the GIA scheme was first built, up to around about 2010, most projects relied on support through the renewable obligation and were funded largely by project finance from particularly two main banks. So it was non-recourse finance, and they were given a loan solely for that project without having to rely on any security or on other assets. The loan would generally fund around about 80% of the costs. The further 20% or thereabouts had tended to be funded through significant grants provided mainly by the big lottery, also through Highlands and Islands Enterprise and a number of other agencies. Really, from around 2010 onwards, with the introduction of the feed-in tariff, that changed, and the bulk of community projects, certainly those below 5 megawatts, opted to go through the feed-in tariff scheme for support instead, because that offered a more realistic level of support for projects of that size. Again, they tended to be largely funded through non-recourse project finance. The main difference that came about is that around about 2011, the Department of Energy and Climate Change decided that there were significant issues with providing grant funding for projects that were also receiving the feed-in tariff, initially in terms of state aids from a European perspective, but also just in terms of the perception that was considered double funding. So since then, effectively, most projects that have gone forward have really been squeezing as much as possible out of the bank loans, and have been funding that effectively 100% through project finance. The kind of big three issues, just very briefly, that we're facing at the moment, community and small scale projects find it particularly hard to gain finance generally. They tend to have no equity of their own, no assets that they can use as security for taking on a secured loan, and few, if any, economies of scale. Generally, they'll be taking forward one project. They haven't got a wide portfolio of projects to help balance their risks or get that economy of scale. So that's the first issue. The second is that they're facing significant uncertainty at the moment in terms of the incentive framework, which really does put off funders quite significantly. We've seen over the past 18 months very significant changes to the RO scheme, but more particularly to the feed-in tariff scheme, and very mixed messages as well coming from the UK government. The final issue is that there are a very limited number of capital funders who are interested in providing project finance in particular, and so that has been a real issue in terms of a sort of lack of competition, but also just in terms of the time that those funders actually have to provide to projects. It means that they're focusing much more on larger, more ones that are more profitable for them.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. I think we'd quite like to tease some of these issues out in questioning. Can I just pick up on your last point about funders? You mentioned earlier on in your comments that there were two banks. Would they be Co-op and Triodos? Is that right?
They have tended to be the main funders to date. Yes. Yeah,
and I mean clearly Co-op has as well publicised difficulties, and Triodos I think has pulled back a bit as well, hasn't it, from funding?
We haven't noticed Triodos pulling back generally as much, but they are tending to focus on larger schemes. I suppose they can pick and choose now, really what they go for. It was a great sadness to us to see Co-op pull out of the market. Their renewables team had been very helpful, very supportive, and actually that had been one of the most profitable parts of the bank from what we had heard. So it's a great pity that they aren't lending anymore. Santander are starting to move into the market, which is very welcome, but again they're focusing on quite large projects generally. They tend to be saying 10 to 20 million is where they're focusing it, and they're also looking to offer shorter loan terms, maybe 7 to 10 years typically, as opposed to 10 or 15, which has been seen in the past from other banks.
And the other mainstream high street banks, like of RBS, Lloyds, TSB, are they,
as far as we can
they're not
see,
interested at all?
As far as we can see, some of them have talked about providing schemes for farmers in particular, and for rural businesses that have other assets that they can use as security. That's useful, but we've seen very little interest from others. The charity bank have started to move into the renewable sector for charity specifically, and they're interested in lending potentially less than £1 million, which is useful. Social Investment Scotland also have provided funding into a number of schemes, but it's a relatively small amount that they can provide, only around about 250,000. So those have really been the sole players we've dealt with to date.
Okay. And in terms of those who are lending, the percentage that they're prepared to lend, is that still around 80% of value?
Yeah, up to a point, yes. It's 80%, but then they will take into account the sweat equity, if you like, that community groups have invested in getting the projects to that stage. So they'll look at the overall value of the project as opposed to just the amount that they're willing to lend. And so effectively, for the capital costs, some of them in recent years have been able to lend £100,000, sorry, 100%, and without that, a lot of the community groups really would have struggled.
Yes, you answered a lot of the questions already. Good morning, anyway. No, I just wanted to point on that particular point, saying about a lot of communities are managing still to get some financing, but do we get finances for community-owned project, or do we get financing only for projects without ownership as a key of it? I would like clarification on this.
Sure. So there are a number of different models out there. Some of them are joint ventures between a community group and perhaps a landowner or a commercial developer, and in some cases, the commercial developer has been able to bring in other sources of finance or other banks that might not have been interested otherwise. But the bulk of projects out there that we've been involved with are wholly community-owned. The model tends to be that you would have some form of community development trust, usually a company limited by guarantee, which would have a wholly owned trading subsidiary, and it would be that subsidiary that takes on the loans. So that kind of wholly owned model has been the one that has been most prevalent to date in Scotland.
Thank you very much. That answers my question.
Mackenzie?
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to clarify the point you seem to be making. Are you saying that the energy market reform process, because of mixed messages, the amount of time it's taken and so on, is damaging communities' prospects to get projects underway and benefit
that's
from
been a very significant issue. I would say it's not so much the energy market reform and the replacement for the RO that's been an issue, although it is still slightly unclear how smaller community groups will be able to benefit through that process. It's more to do with the changes and the cuts that there have been in the past few years to the renewable obligation that have affected some of the bigger community projects. But most significantly, the changes that there have been to the feed-in tariff as well. The digression system, which is in place now, means that communities or any developers are to guarantee their tariff, they have to make a preliminary accreditation this month before midnight on Hogmanay, which isn't a particularly helpful deadline, I'm afraid, for doing lots of business. And that will be submitted to Ofgem. Ofgem are saying they don't know how long it will take to get that confirmed. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. And that will, for wind, that will only give you a period of 1 year from the date you submit that to have that guaranteed tariff. The effect of that is disastrous because it means that everything is being done in a ginormous rush. I mean, I'm out to, after this, go and meet with a developer who has consent, a grid connection for a 2-turbine site. And they are going to pre-accredit this week, but they have been told by their funders that they can't get to financial close until they get confirmation that preliminary accreditation has been successful. Now, if that only comes through in June, it only leaves them 6 months to get it commissioned and built. Otherwise, they'll be subject to a 20% cut in the FIT, which would make it unviable. And that's a disaster for turbine suppliers as well, because everyone's in the same boat. Everyone is wanting their turbine delivered and built in the last 6 months of the year, 3 of which are not ideal at all for building. Scottish Power, for instance, have over 500 projects that they need to connect next year. And they have very little confidence that will actually happen. So the position that many community groups and rural businesses will be in is that they have consented projects with secure grid, and a few years ago would have been considered ready to go, but they may well either not be able to get finance because the banks quite rightly consider it far too risky, or they'll be left in the lurch, having paid a significant amount up front and to have the rug pulled out from underneath them. So I would say that's a huge problem for wind, because we know that cut is coming. For hydro and PV, we don't know yet what the cut will be. We don't know what feed-in tariff rate will be applicable in 3 months' time. And all of that creates enormous uncertainty, which is very damaging. I think the other aspect which has been a real issue is that there are such mixed messages coming from the UK government. I mean, we'll have Greg Barker saying that he wants 20 gigawatts of solar installed. Then we'll have the Environment Minister saying that he wants rid of all these windmills and things that are appearing. I'll have Ed Davey saying that we're very much open for business, open for investment. And then David Cameron is publicly saying that he thinks maybe we have enough wind in the UK, and privately saying that he wants rid of all this green nonsense. So it's allegedly, sorry, I should say allegedly. But it does mean that funders out there have very little confidence that there's a clear message coming from the UK government on this, or that they're going to stick to that. I really can't emphasise enough how important it is to have support systems in place that are really long term. These projects are very long term. I mean, some of the projects in the Western Isles that have recently been built, they've been in the pipeline for 8 years maybe, because of some of the grid issues and things that they've faced. So having that support there, having clear messages and having it long term is absolutely vital to pull in finance. Otherwise it just makes everything more risky and more expensive ultimately.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that very comprehensive answer, and I think you've preempted most of the further questions that I might have wished to ask. I suppose my final question would be that, and you'll understand where I'm coming from when I say that I represent the Highlands and Islands, that it seems to me particularly unfortunate that the promise that renewable energy opportunities held for a lot of communities that have been in socio-economic decline for generations now, that promise was held out to them, and now it appears that, you know, it's going to be snatched away, or there's a high risk of that. Do you agree with me that that's particularly unfortunate?
It is, yeah, it is. I mean, there are examples of projects in the Highlands and Islands that have gone a very long way down that road, and are now facing the prospect of having something that they've invested thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of pounds in, which just won't be viable, which is a massive lost opportunity potentially. I think there are ways of resolving that, which are potentially within the power of the Scottish Parliament, although a lot of the issues are to do with UK incentives. I mentioned that originally the projects were largely supported through the RO and with significant grant support. It may be that after some of the cuts that we're seeing, ironically, the RO will provide a higher level of support than the feed-in tariff. And so we could potentially see a situation where groups are now looking to go through the RO and use a significant grant if that grant is available, be that through the lottery, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, or the Scottish Government. So I think there are ways that we can still salvage this, and I really, really hope that happens, because I agree that it would be a deeply sad and missed opportunity if these projects were to fail at the final hurdle.
Just with your indulgence, convener, and it's actually more for the benefit of other committee members than for me, but this is quite a complex environment, the subsidy environment. You know, we talk about contracts for difference, ROs, feed-in tariff. Would you give just a brief explanation of those different mechanisms to illustrate the point you just made?
Absolutely. So the renewable obligation has been around for some time. Originally, it was really the only renewable subsidy, and so that was why a lot of community groups who are even developing small projects used that. It gives a subsidy of approximately 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour generated. And that's a market-traded subsidy. So the amount that you receive for that will vary. Feed-in tariffs were brought in around 2010. They give different rates of support for different types of technology and different sizes of technology, and the amounts are fixed and in fact are linked to RPI. So once you're in that scheme, you know that for a 20-year period, the support you get will be guaranteed. And because that gives a greater level of support to smaller projects which have higher costs per kilowatt installed, that has been really important in securing a viable level of support for smaller projects and other technologies like solar PV as well. The contracts for difference will be brought in from around about between 2015 and 2017, and it is a form of feed-in tariff effectively, but as opposed to the feed-in tariff where you got the fixed amount and then whatever the wholesale cost was on top of that, with contracts for difference there will be a strike price agreed, and that price is agreed to be the price at which is the kind of minimum required to make a project of a particular technology happen. If the market price is less than that strike price, then you'll get a top-up towards that. If the market price exceeds the strike price, then the generator will actually have to pay some of that back. So that helps keep costs down for consumers. The details of that are still very much being worked out. So, as I say, it's yet to be seen how well that will will work for community groups, although it seems like a good concept in principle. So by and large, it's been ROCs and feed-in tariff so far that the community groups have used.
Thank you very much.
Chief Brody.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I wonder if I may ask, I mean, I know we're talking about community ownership, but clearly part of the problem in terms of installations, specifically in the south of Scotland, has been the issue of community benefit versus community ownership. Do you see any significant shift away from what some of us would like to see, a shift from community benefit to either community ownership or participation, community participation in the equity of wind farms?
Yeah,
Okay, we're slightly off topic in terms of access to finance, but we do have some time in hand, so I'll allow the question.
In terms of access to finance, if you wish.
We have some time in hand, so I'll let you off on this occasion, Mr. Brody.
Well, it has significance in terms of finance.
No, I agree. It does certainly. Yeah, the issue of community benefits is one that has come up a lot, and we've been pleased to see some change to that recently, in that Scottish Renewables, the industry body, have agreed to kind of a rate of 5k per megawatt, and hopefully developers will sign up to that and will agree to pay that amount. I think what we're also very keen to see is that money being put to best use, and I'm sure developers are keen to see that as well. There's nothing wrong with hanging baskets and things like that, but when you see some of the fantastic projects that communities with their own turbines have helped to fund with the income from their turbines, you think sometimes there could be more done with that money. So we're very keen to see a kind of broader concept of community benefit, and perhaps to look at ways at which communities that have a lot of community benefit money and don't know what to do with that could help invest that money in other community renewable projects elsewhere that are struggling to find finance. We have certainly over the past few years seen a greater number of joint ventures where developers are offering communities a stake in their projects. That is not without its complexities, and we've seen quite a wide range of different models adopted, but that's been very successful in places like Neilston as well, most recently. And potentially, as I mentioned earlier, that can help draw in further finance as well into projects which might, if they were wholly owned by a community, have struggled to find funding. But I think there's no doubt that in terms of the capacity that community groups build and the benefits that they accrue, doing wholly owned community projects is often the best way to go to really maximise those benefits, and certainly that's what we've seen, is that the majority of projects out there are wholly community owned, which I think is very positive.
Thank you very much.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Convener. One of the three big issues you mentioned was the lack of economies of scale. Do community ventures ever get together with others? Is that something that's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where possible, they'll certainly try to do that. I think one of the best examples was in Orkney, where there were, I think, 6 community projects on individual islands got together to form Community Power Orkney. And that was very useful in terms of exchanging ideas and assistance, but also in jointly employing consultants and in approaching turbine manufacturers as well. They were able to say, look, this isn't just a single project out on an island in the middle of nowhere. We've got 6 projects here instead, so it's worth your while coming to do this. And so that has been very important, and there are definitely places where that can work well. The issue, I suppose, is that the projects are still quite small, and the level of due diligence that has to be done for a small project is pretty much the same as it would be for a big project. You might be looking at a fee from the bank of £60,000 potentially for a due diligence, and that won't change much whether it's a 1 megawatt project or a 10 megawatt project. And even after shelling that out, you've got no guarantee that they'll actually say yes and give you the money. So it's issues like that are real difficulty across projects when it comes to economies of scale, I would say.
Okay. You mentioned that small projects are more expensive, but they can have much greater community benefit. And we've obviously discussed the barriers that there are. There's access to finance, there's getting hold of the land, there's access to the grid. And you have mentioned that you believe, and I'm heartened to hear that you think this is salvageable. What extra support, what could we do in Scotland? What extra support could be provided to make sure that these projects do have the opportunity to flourish?
I think, as I mentioned, the concept of potentially returning to ROCs plus grant is one that we've been giving some thought, and it may well be that will be the only route forward. Obviously, the Scottish Parliament does have an element of control over the ROC banding. Perhaps there could be a specific banding brought in for community projects. Certainly, a community feed-in tariff has been discussed with Department of Energy and Climate Change. And a very limited version has been brought in, but it doesn't give any additional support, and it also doesn't really recognise the Scottish model, I suppose, of community renewables, and that it doesn't support companies limited by guarantee. It really only gives support to co-ops and BENCOMs and community interest companies, which are more limited in their use in Scotland. They haven't been used to the same extent so far. So I think potentially looking at whether grant funding could be brought in again would be useful. The other thing is just in terms of timescales. The real challenge that the groups face is in getting these projects financed in time and getting them connected to the grid in time as well. The grid is now another huge problem in Scotland because the capacity is so limited, and the district network operators have such a high workload to do in getting all these projects connected in time. So if pressure can be brought to bear on that as well, or additional support given where there's particularly expensive grid upgrades required, that would be very useful, I think.
A brief follow-up, Mike McKenzie.
Yeah, I was my ears pricked up when you talked about the fees for due diligence, and it seems to me that, you know, for a community, once they've jumped through all the uncertainties and hoops about grid connections and so on and so forth, planning applications, planning permission, that you seriously suggesting to me that a bank for a small project, perhaps a feed-in project, where it's possible to predict with a high degree of certainty, for instance, how much power a wind generator may generate over the course of over a year, that banks are charging 60k and figures of that merely to perform due diligence.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean the fees are always going to be larger for project finance because the bank, I suppose, is entirely reliant on that project performing. If you are in the position of having some form of collateral that could be used instead, be that land or another asset, those fees would come down because if the project fails, then the bank can take security over that instead.
Sure, but am I not right in saying that, you know, prior to them issuing a decision whether or not they'll lend at all, they do the due diligence. So what they're asking small communities to come up with that sort of upfront fee merely to carry out due diligence. That, you know, I come from a business background. I would expect that kind of calculation and assessment to take me no more than half an hour. I'm sure Chick Brodie would agree. Even Chick's fee wouldn't be 60k for that amount of work. Can you, you know, I mean, I would invite you, and I think this is an important point in terms of the frame of reference of this inquiry. Would you be prepared to submit some further written evidence to the committee on this particular subject? Because I think it really is important.
Yeah. In defence of the banks, I think the communities, whilst they found it enormously expensive and frustrating and prolonged, in some cases they have found the due diligence process useful because it's a double check that all the ducks are in the row, and there's a lot that they need to go through in this in these kind of projects. But it is frustrating because it's a lot of money, and you think, could there be ways that that could be avoided given what we know about these kind of projects now. Another interesting concept would be, is there ways that the Scottish Government could perhaps provide an element of backing to these projects to reduce those due diligence fees and to effectively provide that guarantee or collateral in the event of the project failing. It's an open question, I suppose.
Thank you very much. Paul Mallock.
I get the feeling that there seems to be a sort of wind of blame towards central government. And I also get the feeling that you're suggesting that the Scottish Government's not doing enough to support what you're trying to achieve. So what's the middle ground? I mean, how do you think the Scottish Government could help you achieve the maximum result?
Well, I wouldn't entirely agree with that, and that's my own fault for not having given perhaps the full picture. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So either you're telling me something wrong, or I'm not picking you up right.
The Scottish Government have been very supportive generally of community renewables, and for instance the CARE scheme, the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, is absolutely vital to getting these projects off the ground in the first place by providing effectively soft loans as they are now, which will be repayable in the event that the project goes ahead, but would be written off if they if the project fails for some reason, if it can't get planning consent or a grid connection or so on. So the CARE scheme is absolutely vital to that, and we're really pleased that the Scottish Government have developed what is a very groundbreaking scheme, really, that is now being potentially replicated elsewhere. Sorry.
In terms of planning, you also suggested that there was a time lapse of nearly 6 months in some instances. And if that's the case, surely then it becomes very ineffective, is it not? Particularly if you run out of time.
Sorry, I don't quite follow in terms of planning consent, or
yeah.
The planning consents would usually be valid for a number of years, but the issue.
The time it takes to get to that.
Yes, yeah, well, absolutely, yeah. The time taken to get to planning could be several years potentially, depending on the studies that need done. The time after planning, again, can also be several years, depending on whether or not you have to wait for a long grid connection or something like that. So
people could sit on something for up to 3 years or more.
Or more. I mean, generally they don't want to do that. It'll be because they've been put into that position because of maybe a transmission upgrade that isn't due to happen until 2020. One of the projects I'm involved with is in exactly that boat at the moment, and it's enormously frustrating having invested so much into it.
Surely if people know that they can find themselves in that position, that it could take 3 to 6 years, it might actually suit people to allow themselves to sit on that without saying that they're to blame? Use the system to their advantage.
I wouldn't see how that would be to their advantage, really. I mean, if you've invested so much in it, you want to see a return on that, and you're only going to get that return once the project's actually built and operating. So
depend on the grants available at the time. If the level of grant shifts, then people could land bank, sit on it till the grants become favourable.
Well, in terms of the CARES scheme, for instance, it's a soft loan scheme. So, as I say, it could be written off, at which point it would effectively be a grant. But if it goes ahead, then it is a loan scheme, and you will be accruing interest at the rate of 10%. So, again, it's very much not in your interest to sit on it and not develop it. The government would expect to see that project progressing, and if it went ahead, then you would need to repay that loan with the annual 10% interest applied.
I've witnessed something similar to this in industry, where when people are in a position to invest, if the investment is not in their best interest at the time, they may choose to sit and wait till the soft grants come in rather than loans. And that's the danger that might allow the time to slip. So I think we need to maybe ensure that there's some sort of mechanism in place that we don't allow people to do that, and hence we then don't fall behind at our timetable in terms of renewable energy.
No, I see what you mean. I would say, though, that given all the trajectories for the support schemes are downwards, it's only in their interest to do things as soon as possible. The ROC scheme is going down, feed-in tariffs are going down. We still don't know what it's going to be exactly for the strike prices for EMR. So even if there was the prospect of grant at some point in the future, I don't think that would stop projects from going full steam ahead now, because they want to see these projects getting built. And when it's been volunteers developing it for 8 years, they really want to get to the end of the project as well. They don't want to stretch it out any longer than they have to.
Thank you. Can you mentioned the CARES scheme a couple of times. I know that Community Energy Scotland no longer administer that as from August, but you did historically. I'm thinking of a particular issue in my parliamentary region that's come up. When somebody applied for a so-called community development, what steps did you take to make sure that had genuine community support?
Well, as you say, we aren't involved in that anymore. It's Local Energy Scotland delivering the scheme now, and they may have slightly different procedures in place. We always encouraged early community consultation at a very early stage. That would be written into the conditions of the loan. We wanted to keep it flexible because for some communities, particularly larger ones, conducting a full ballot could be very complex. But most communities have gone down the road of actually holding a ballot and ensuring that it is something that the community wants to do. And we've seen some fairly remarkable results to that. I mean, one project I was involved in, they had a turnout from their electoral roll of about 53%, I think, which is bigger than you get on general elections. And the project got 97% support from those who turned out. So there will be instances, I'm sure, where some people in the community don't want it to go ahead, and that's fair enough. And there are a number of projects out there where, following the consultation, it's been decided that it isn't the right thing for them to do, or they've moved on to do something different, or to change the location of the site or something along those lines. But having that genuine community support is absolutely vital. I would agree.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a specific case where a community group put forward an application. There's been a lot of local opposition to it that I'm aware of, and the people who were opposing it were actually very resentful of the fact that, in effect, the application was being funded by public money, and then when rejected by the local authority, the developers then went to appeal, again funded through public money, and the people objecting, of course, had no access to public funds to make the opposite case.
I would be very surprised if the appeal had been funded, certainly through the carers scheme. In fact, I can say it wasn't funded through the carers scheme, because the Scottish Government have taken the view that that wouldn't be something that they would fund in that instance. There will always be some people who don't want these things to go ahead, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a majority that don't want it to. And as I say, we always encouraged as much consultation as possible, and indeed ballots where that seemed like the right move. To protect the individuals involved, quite apart from anything else, because they don't want to be in that position themselves.
If there are no more questions, that's been very helpful, Mr. Adam. Thank you very much for coming along and for giving your time. Thank you. Thank you. Right, members just like to stay where they are. We have one more item in public session before we go into private session. Actually, it was 5. Was it 5? Right. Okay. Item. Where are we? Item 3 on the agenda. We have to consider our EU priorities. And if I can just find my paper, I'm very grateful to the clerks for preparing a paper on the question of European Union strategy and priorities for engagement in 2014. Now, the convener of the European and External Relations Committee wrote to me on this issue, and you will see in your paperwork a draft proposed response, which sums up some of the key issues we've considered over the past year or so in relation to European engagement. Happy to hear any comments anyone has got on the terms of that draft. Yes, Mr. Brody.
Yeah, but generally it's fine, but we did have the meeting in the European reporters in Brussels to talk about the procurement directives that will come from the Commission, and I just wonder whether there should be at least some recognition that we might have to consider that at some stage in 2014.
Procurement directives?
Yeah.
Okay. Are people happy to add in a reference to that? Yeah? Okay.
Reference to the public
procurement bill, Margaret?
We haven't mentioned anything about tourism, you know, as part of the economy. And I think we should.
Well, is there a specific European angle on tourism you want to refer to?
No, I just think it is part of the economy. It's part of what this committee its responsibility, so we should be including it when we're writing to it.
Yeah, we can suggest that we want to keep abreast of tourist developments as part of the wider section on the economy and economic growth. We can put something in, make a reference to it. Sorry, Mr. Malik. Yeah.
Are we going to ask the European and External Relations Committee to keep you abreast of it, or who?
No, it'll be done through our support team here, our clerking team here.
Right. Will you be liaisoning with the European External Relations Committee or independently?
I'll let Stephen answer.
Yeah, we have very close relations with our colleagues on the European Committee, so between them and our colleagues in SPICE, they'll be making sure that we're kept abreast of any legislative policy or financial changes at European level. And this provides us with a sort of a set of priorities so we can make sure that we focus the information. And a lot of the discussion that we would have initially on what to bring to the committee, how important it is through your own European reporter, as in Mr. Brody. So probably our first discussions are with Chick about the information that we're coming in, how does this fit into the committee's priorities. So this just provides us with a bit of framework and a bit of a steer about what to focus on, because there's a vast amount of information out there, a vast amount of developments that are happening in Europe, so this just gives us a bit of a steer about what to bring to you and when.
It's just the reason why I'm interested in this particular aspect is that I don't think, maximized our opportunities in terms of our tourism and engaging with Europe in terms of developing that industry. I've felt time and time again that we've perhaps not resourced our industry as well as we could. Now, I took the opportunity last time when we were speaking to our witnesses here that they get together with Visit Scotland and the banks to try and assist tourist industry up and down Scotland, and they did say that they would do it, but I don't think as a committee had any benchmarking in terms of how they would progress that and who would report that back to us, and this is why I'm a little interested in seeing what results that we can get out of this. Just being in the loop, I don't think is enough. I think I want to see some tangible results out of that.
Well, that's a slightly different issue from the one we're addressing now, which is about EU strategy and EU engagement. We do have Visit Scotland coming in January, 15th of January, to give us evidence in relation to 2014 and all the events happening there. And there will be an opportunity then, if you want to pursue some of these questions with Visit Scotland, and thereafter we want to pursue that with Scottish Government ministers, we can do that.
But perhaps it would be better with Scottish ministers, because it's not really about the Commonwealth Games. It's more about Europe and engaging in Europe and seeing how we can maximise our engagement in Europe. I mean, some of the European countries have a lot of experience in tourism, and particularly France, and I'm hoping that we want to maybe learn some of the lessons from them to support our own tourist industry.
Well, when Visit Scotland come to speak to us in January, it's a very fair question to put to them. What engagement do they have with other tourist agencies around Europe? What is the level of information and knowledge sharing? And then if there are issues coming out of that, we can then follow them up thereafter.
Perhaps the clerks could actually write to them in advance and give them notice that we'll be asking for that information. It'll give them an opportunity to get that stuff for us.
It's on the public record now, but we're happy to engage with Visit Scotland staff prior to their appearance on the 15th to just, as we always do, give them a heads up of the kind of questions that might be asked. So happy to.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
To do that.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, I'm not sure whether this is what I'm about to ask is for our committee or the Infrastructure Committee, but I do think it's very important. I chaired a meeting 2 weeks ago of people from Europe, Spanish Ministry, etc., about the 10T funding, 10T being Trans-European Network for Transport. There is a decision to be made, reference the allocation of €26.2 billion, part of which is dedicated to establishing ports, particularly on the east coast of Scotland and Northern Isles, with reference to ensuring that they provide clean marine fuel, i.e. methanol or liquefied natural gas, and that ships will not be allowed to go in and out there unless the ports are in a position to do that. Now, I have to say this again as another example of us not knowing what has been going on in Europe. The decision is going to be made within the month, but the longer-term implications are huge, given that this 26 billion will leverage another 500 billion euros over the next 10 years. So I'm not sure we should perhaps ask Stephen to liaise with the Capital and Infrastructure Committee and ensure that at least some commentary. I have a question down this afternoon for the Cabinet Secretary, but this is quite, in fact, it's of great significance in terms of particularly eastern seaboard ports and the Northern Isles.
I think that's really a matter, as you say, for the Infrastructure Committee, but we can ask the clerks to liaise with the clerks to that committee. Okay, just going back to the terms of this letter, subject to the comments people have made, are people content with that? In which case, are people happy for that to be redrafted and happy for me to sign that off?
Content.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, just before we go into private session, as this is the last meeting of the year, I just want to put on record our thanks to our wonderful support team, our team of clerks, and to Spice, and to all those who assist. And we couldn't do it without you. So thank you all very much, and please have a happy Christmas and a very happy New Year. And with that, we go into private session.